Hi, this is Jeff, and this is Photoshop, Importing, and DPI. So, if you're going to use Photoshop, you probably need to be able to get files into Photoshop. So that's what we're going to concentrate on first in this screencast, and then we're going to move on to a couple of the things that you can run into in that process. So, if I was going to open a file in Photoshop, the very first thing I would think to do is go to File, like any other application, and hit Open. And I can do that, and it'll open the typical system dialog. You notice I can do whatever. I'm going to go to the desktop here, and I'm going to select a file and pop it open. So I've opened a file. Not a lot of surprise there, but that's not the only means by which we can open files in Photoshop. We can also take a file, and this one is also on the desktop, and I'm going to drag it up here to the top bar here and drag it in that way. We can also go in and we can go File, and one of our options is Open and Browse in Bridge. This will launch the Adobe Bridge application. It's like a photo browser. It's not that different actually in execution from the Mac photo browser or from something like Picasa or something like that. But we could grab any one of these files and open it in Photoshop as well. I'm not going to right now just to save us time. But it's got a full-featured tool where you can actually, you see, those are the two I opened just now. I can go from my documents directory, what have you. So it's a full-featured browsing tool. One of the advantages of Bridge is it'll also let you open up different Adobe type formats in Photoshop. So if you had different formats that are compatible with Photoshop from other Adobe applications, it'll show you those kind of natively. So that's one of the advantages of Bridge. So we've talked about how you get files in, but that's not the whole story. So let's talk about some of the complications we can have with files once they're into Photoshop. Okay, so we have a couple of files open in Photoshop here, but I want you to pay attention to a couple of things. First of all, let's look at this file. And if we look up here at the top, we notice that it actually is a PNG file. So it's one type of file format that's an image format. PNG is an image format that's commonly used. But let's look at the second one, and it's actually a JPEG format, JPG, which is also a commonly used format. Why do I call that to your attention? Well, quite frankly, the different formats that are out there of images have different strengths and weaknesses. And so you may encounter a couple of different things when you bring them into the Photoshop. Sometimes they won't have the same quality, sometimes they'll have extra data attached to them. It just depends. So sometimes it pays to pay attention to what type of photo or file format that you're actually importing. That's the first thing that you'll want to watch out for. But the second thing you'll want to watch out for is something called DPI, and that's dots per pixel inch. Okay, so I've opened two different versions of the same file here, and I want to show you the difference and what difference DPI makes. So I'm going to go up here and I'm going to go to Image on this file, and I'm going to look at image size. And if we look, it tells us that this is 1440 pixels by 900 pixels. Pixels being the smallest piece of information typically that Photoshop deals in for displaying images. Notice though that the document size is actually bigger than we would assume. It's actually 20 inches by 12.5 inches. So what that breaks down to is 72 pixels per inch, DPI. So what we're going to do is we're going to keep that in mind. So we're remembering it's 1440 by 900 and it comes out to about 20 wide with 72 pixels. So keep that in mind for a moment. We're going to come back over here to the other image. This is just a different version of the same file. We're going to image size, and notice it's 1440 by 900, but it's only 12 inches wide, and it has a DPI of 120 pixels per inch. But that's not the only difference, and you don't have to just take my word for it. Okay, so in order to illustrate DPI one last time, I want to show you a couple of tools that might be helpful to you in using Photoshop down the road. So, in order to demonstrate DPI, I've got two versions of the same file, but they're actually at different DPIs. So, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take this first file and I'm going to go to View, and I'm going to go to Show, and I'm going to go to Grid. Then I'm going to go to the second file up here, select it. I'm going to go to View, I'm going to Show, and I'm also going to go to Grid on it. Notice the grids between these two files are different. What that is telling you is that the grids are being established differently because there's a different DPI. However, we can actually demonstrate this another way. So I'm going to tear each of these files loose, just like that, and I'm going to grab the tab on this other one, just like this. And now I've torn each of these files loose, and we can see that even though Photoshop is viewing at 66.67% for both, and it looks pretty similar, it's actually a different pixel depth between the two of them. So, what am I going to do now to show you kind of the big difference? Well, let's go up to View one more time, and I'm going to go to Rulers and turn Rulers on. Often in Photoshop, I work with my rulers on almost all the time. It lets me know exactly the size that I'm working with. But if you notice here, look at the size of this image. We've got 20 inches across the top here. We've got 12 inches across the top here. These files don't look that different, but they actually have different pixel depths, different DPI that you're working with. Okay, so we've talked about how we can import files. We talked about a couple different ways we could do that and get them into Photoshop, but we also talked about where we could run into the issues of DPI in that, the dots per pixel inch, and so we have the resolution of the file can actually be an issue for us. But now that we figured all that out, let's actually talk about how we can export files from Photoshop into different formats. And we'll do that in the next screencast.